I will pause just briefly, as brief as possible, as people join us throughout the session. These Tuesdays tend to get pretty busy. Again, we are covering charts today within IVolLive. This is kind of a beefy topic, so we're going to split it up into 3 parts. So with that as our background, what we'll do is I'll do some demos, and then I'll weave in some maybe current market news, and then I'll show how to build the charts, and then we'll try to save 5 to 10 minutes for questions. This is being recorded, so as soon as our video team has a chance to edit it, we'll email it out to everybody so you can access it as needed. So here we go. I just logged in before the webinar began, so that way we could simulate kind of the user experience. If you've just joined us, I know we do have some new folks, so welcome. When you do log in for the first time, you'll see our friendly green and white concierge here who will welcome you to IVolLive. He'll kind of be your tour guide, showing different ways to access the tools. So in this case, you can access them via the left or over here in the toolbox, kind of in the middle of the page. We're going to spend most of our time today within the IVolLive tab. That's where most of our charting system and software lives. Here we have IVolLive, which I just mentioned. That's kind of the brain and the beating heart of our platform. Up here, this is how you can click to join any of our upcoming webinars. We'll announce a new topic tomorrow, and that'll be charts part 3. That's the spoiler alert. And then this is a good spot to go every week to make sure you're registered for the weekly webinar, as these spots do fill up and there is limited seating available. Here we can expand, contract based on these chevrons, depending on what device you're on. And for anything, we're always available at support@ivolatility.com, whether that's questions about charts or anything else on this platform. This is the best way to reach us, support@ivolatility. I'll post that in the chat before we wrap today. So that way, even if people join late, they have that readily available. All right. So once we are in the dashboard, real quick, here's what we're looking at, some of the latest news. Ultimately, charts are useful when you know what you want to analyze, right? If you have no clue what you want to analyze, charts are useless. And so what I like to do any given market session is I kind of skim through the market news. I normally find 1 or 2 decent ideas to look at here. It's just quick little sentences on kind of what's going on within the market. And then the other place I go is this news and research tab. So what's unique about this is the editorial that our team is putting out internally at IVolLive. So these are things that are showing up on our screens and on our monitors that could be worth digging into. Last week, or this recent issue, was $1 trillion tech. And so what caught our team's attention was we had these 8 names that had surpassed the $1 trillion market cap. And then many of them were retracing. So the question became, did it make sense to go short, or did it make sense to bet on a rebound? And so you'll see, kind of throughout, here's the different charts, which we'll highlight today. On our charts within IVolLive, what's great is we have price in blue, as well as implied volatility in green and historical volatility in orange. So I'll show that in a moment, but it's a really, you get a lot with a little within IVolLive. And then of course, volume down here at the bottom. And then continuing on, we also showed how to apply Bollinger Bands to a chart, and as well as the RSI to a chart. So that's another cool tool that we'll show today. Excuse me, a few more people in the waiting room. There we go. Welcome. And then, of course, we come here and how to play it, right? So all this information is great, but how can we use it to impact our options trading? Because that's what, IVolLive is all about, which is, how to use this as an engine to make good options trades, right? Minimize losses, maximize gains. That's the whole big idea behind the IVolLive platform. So that's your dashboard. And now let's go ahead and move on to IVolLive. I prepared a few examples I want to use based on this editorial that we just went on here, because I like to show how this whole platform works together. So for an example, what our team puts out ties into the screens and what we're seeing on IVolLive, which then ties into the sentiment analyzer, which then runs through the P&L calculator for a potential trade. And then we can back test it with our data download, and we could take a trade and put it on steroids on the real-time spread scanner. So it's like, that's how all these tools work together, but it always starts with, some kind of idea, right? What's worth looking into. So if we come here to IVolLive, then you'll see I've kind of prepared a few different things. But before we hop into charts, I just want to explain this interface. So when you first register, your default's probably going to be the stock monitor, DJX. So all of this is saying is don't let it confuse you. It's just the default tab. I'll move that over here to the left. That's a quick little hack. You can move these tabs however you like. You see I've got it sorted kind of on the user experience. Like you'd start off here on the stock monitor. Then I go to what I look at next. I always look at a chart of the VIX, first thing I do in the morning. And then I have whatever, kind of broad-based index I'm looking at. So since our editorial was heavy on tech, again, if I come back here, since the editorial was heavy on tech, I wanted to focus on QQQ, and so that's why this chart's pulled up. And then I have the charts tab that I'll walk through today. And then I have, various underlyings that I'm digging deeper on over here. But you can, change and adjust, and then you can pull up new tabs either by popping in the ticker, so if you wanted, let's see, Microsoft, you could add Microsoft, and then also you can choose to add another stock monitor, which would be here, like doing a broad-based scan, or charts, or for our friends that trade futures, this is where you'd find additional tabs. So you can add tabs and you can manipulate tabs as you desire. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the stock monitor. This is a topic kind of in and of itself, which basically in that webinar, what I do is I walk through how to run these custom scans, because within IVolLive, you can scan for all kinds of things. Anytime you are in doubt, just find a gear icon and you'll see the different things you can look at. So as you can see, we have dozens and dozens of different things we can scan for. Once you put them on green and select them, they show up as new columns here within the stock monitor. So you can see, you can measure for, here's options volume, for an example. You can go ascending, descending, and anytime you have a question on what something means, you just have to hover over it and you'll get the example, or you get the explanation, excuse me. So, and again, you can sort ascending, descending, and you can add or subtract to these columns accordingly here. So again, we do a whole webinar on that. The other kind of easy scans that I run every morning when I'm looking for trading ideas, as you can see, top stocks by volume. So this is running a volume scan against this particular group, which is the Dow, DJX, but you can do it against any of our universe of coverage within IVolLive. And if you know anything about IVolLive, we have a huge universe, global universe. Then we have, IVX mean versus 20-day historical volatility. So this is like the future, right? IVX versus the past 20-day historical volatility. Then we have IVX historical range. This is like a 52-week range for a stock, but instead of the price, it's the 52-week range on implied volatility. So that's great because when people are just kind of starting to study IVolLive, you'll get this number, right? So for Dollar General, the IVX 30 is 40.47. So that might seem high, low. I don't know if you're new and you're a rookie to implied volatility, you don't really know what that means. And so what this scan does is it puts that all in context. It says, look, 40.47 is actually a historically high implied volatility reading for Dollar General. And that's important because each individual stock has its own volatility range and readings. And so it's important to know and put that in context. And so that's why this is one of my favorite scans. And then IVX change from yesterday. So this is showing you where the action is today. And so we could see for Intel, it has an 8.82% change in its implied volatility day over day. And that's significant. That means something's going on here. Goldman Sachs, something's going on. Dow Chemical, American Express, JP Morgan, Visa. So you can see we have, a handful of these in double-digit territory, which typically means something is going on. And we can toggle ascending, descending there as well. So the point is again, that's a beefy topic in and of itself. We'll do a stock monitor webinar in the coming weeks, and I'll show how to run all those scans. I'll show how to create custom scans, and then do a few other hacks on the stock monitor. But for now, what you would do is, what's great about this is you could create a new group, and this new group could be whatever you're most interested in diving deeper on. And why would we dive deeper? Well, we do that through the charts. So we could say chart ideas. So as I was scanning and as I'm reading through these news items, I'm building this watch list that I want to investigate further. And so having read our editorial this morning, I know that it was all about companies that had hit $1 trillion market cap. Some have stayed there, like Apple, and others have retraced. And so I can just kind of key these in. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a custom watch list that I want to dig deeper on, and meta. All right. So you can see within like 30 seconds, we just created this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 names that we're interested in digging deeper on, right? And now we have this custom group. And once you create a custom group, I know this question came up. Once you create a custom group, you're able to bring that throughout the whole platform here. So this custom group you can now use in sentiment analyzer and real-time spread scanner. That's a little bit beyond today's webinar, but the question did come up. Once you create a group, does it stay within this tab, or can you bring it throughout the platform? You can bring this throughout the platform. So now we have this kind of $1 trillion tech portfolio, if you will, that we can look at further. So before I dive into individual names, I want to do a brief recap on what we showed last Tuesday. So last Tuesday was a broad-based overview of charts available within the stock monitor, which is what this is. We call this interface the stock monitor. So the key differences between the charts available here and the charts on the chart tab is as follows. You'll see fundamentals on the left. So this is for the VIX. You'll see the options chain down here. The main thing is when you come here, you could see what comes standard with IVolLive is we have up to 5 years worth of data that you get for being a user, which is fantastic because you get spot price, which is in blue, you get implied volatility, which is in green, and you get historical volatility, which is in orange. And you get that for every underlying that we cover, right? Not just the VIX. So for any of these names plus, thousands more. And then that's 5 years. You can also dig pretty granular, right? You can go to 24-hour data, 1 month data. My favorites typically, this 1 year chart. But what I like to do on this 1 year chart for the VIX, since this is about charts today, I like to isolate the VIX's implied volatility. So the way to do that is you delete orange, which is historical volatility, you delete blue, which is price. And here we have the VIX. So we have the VIX of the VIX, right? The IVX of the VIX, the fear gauge of the fear gauge. And what's cool about that is you could see, you can use this as kind of like an indicator to know where the VIX might go in the future, right? And where the VIX goes, the market normally runs contrary, right? That inverse relationship. So some of the here is we can draw on these charts. So this is the part of the platform which another question came up, where can we draw? And this is where you can actually draw on the chart itself. So for an example, if we wanted to draw a trend line for the VIX's IVX, we could do that here, right? And there's a lot of different things you could do from this view. You can bulk up that line. You could add, an arrow showing it's heading down. And here we go. So this is, where you would draw. You could also, of course, draw here, boom, boom, boom. We could say, all right, this is our, support line, let's say, for the VIX on this 1 year chart. The other thing you could do that I personally like doing on the VIX especially is you can add technical indicator tools. So on the charting tab, which I'll show in a moment, they don't have anything to do with technical analysis or drawing. So this is where you would do that. And then, here I just added Bollinger Bands, added RSI. So this is illustrative, right? Because we had the IVX for the VIX poked above its upper Bollinger Band recently. That was on the 2nd. And so when that happened, we knew that the VIX would probably retrace, which it ultimately did, because it had poked above its upper Bollinger Band. So by isolating the implied volatility for the VIX, you can help map out, it's like a compass of where the actual VIX's underlying spot price will go. So, we always look for extremes. We like to look for where the VIX's IVX has gone below its lower Bollinger Band or above its upper Bollinger Band. And what I like to do is here, you could come in, once we have this beautiful looking chart, we can now take a photo and add it to our trading journal, right? So this could be the VIX 8/8/2023 for an example. You could tweet it if you so choose. But this is the first chart I run every morning is I isolate the IVX for the VIX and create the fear gauge of the fear gauge to tell me where things are going. Today, I mean, it's kind of middle of the road, right? We're retracing a little bit, kind of going to the middle on the RSI and the Bollinger Band. So there's no clear extreme here, whereas we had a clear extreme here, clear extreme here. That's another drawing tool you can use here and here. Right, so you can mark those up and again save that to your trading journal. You could also save this as a chart layout. So if you really like having Bollinger Bands and RSI, yeah, you could just come here, save that as a chart layout, and then hit save, and then you could apply that to any of these different stocks that you pull up to analyze. So that's this is where you add technical analysis and drawing tools. If we move along, we're going to spend a lot of our time today on tech names, you know, from that $1 trillion tech article that we put out. So other things you could see in this view, right? Like we could look at QQQ. This is, you know, obviously the tech heavy ETF. And you can see this beautiful inverse relationship. So as price has gone higher, QQQ has been very strong this year. So what's interesting about QQQ now, if I was looking at this from a chart perspective, you know, we have this uptrend, which has recently been violated. So now it's going to be interesting to see, here's price in blue. If we come back up and kiss and surpass this line, or we continue lower. What's also interesting is if we look at implied volatility, we've had this downtrend in implied volatility here in green, but now implied volatility is poked above that downtrend. So again, what's going to be interesting to see is if implied volatility comes down and crosses back below the trend line, or if it continues higher, because then ultimately what can happen is you'll see price and implied volatility meet, kiss in the middle, and then that creates some very interesting trading opportunities. So, you know, again, just within like 2 minutes, this is a very interesting chart for me. So I would, again, take a picture, I would save that, and I would know to come back and find, you know, look for interesting trading opportunities. So again, this is where you find your tech analysis, and your volume bars are down here. The other charts you have available to you in this view that are useful. Here's your end of day charts. So obviously this updates at the end of the day, but what you have down here is your maturities. So these are QQQ options that expire 30 days, 60, 90, 120, 150, all the way out to 1,080 days. And what you'll see is the implied volatility for QQQ, at least, kind of steadily rises, then it dips in 150 and 180 days out, and then it rockets higher, right? Because, you know, in general, the future is more uncertain the farther out you go on the expiration curve. And so you'll see where implied volatility continues higher. And in some cases, though, you'll see like on individual stocks where, you know, if as an earnings announcement within the next 30 days, you have this huge high implied volatility reading and then a crash and then a gentle rise higher. So you could look at this for any underlying that you're interested in. In this case, this is QQQ. So that's an interesting chart. Volatility surface is also interesting, though I don't know it's as heavily used, you know, by our user base. But just to look at it very simply, you could go find the peak here. So this is the peak of the mountain, and you see on the x-axis that's 30 days, right? So that's 30-day expiration. On the y, that's minus 55, so that's moneyness, right? And then on Z, that's the volatility percentage. So in this case, what it's saying is, you know, the option that's 55% out of the money and expires in 30 days has the highest volatility. You know, and that's interesting, right? Depending on if you like to trade at the money or out of the money options, or if you're looking for, you know, kind of a reversion of the mean trade. And then we have our volatility table. So this is also interesting too, because you could see on IVX, remember, this is looking into the future. So IVX7 means what's QQQ's implied volatility on options that expire in 7 days, in 14 days, 21, 30, 60, all the way out to 1080. And we could see, you know, kind of in the short term, implied volatility is lower than in the long term, which is what we just saw in that end of day chart. This is just a different way to look at it in table form. You can also look at historical volatility, right? And we could see that, you know, if over the longer term, historical volatility for the QQQ has been a bit higher than what it's been in the shorter term. And that makes sense, right? Because QQQ has been rising higher throughout this year. Tech's been very strong. So as it rises higher, its volatility goes lower. And so it makes sense that the short-term volatility is lower than the long-term volatility. But what's great about this is that you can look at just quickly discrepancies. So if you see a huge spike in HV60 or an IVX60, you know, for an example, if this was like 40 and everything else around it was in the 20s, you know, something's going on here. The market is expecting something to happen around this 60-day marker. So that's another table I like to pull up. The other thing from this view that you can see just real quick is price and implied volatility history charts. So for every single option that we cover, you get a table like this. So this is the QQQ that expires on Friday, or excuse me, this is the QQQ that expires today. And what it shows is the implied volatility. You know, it kind of went steady, spiked, and then has crashed throughout the day. I like to go to last price. Bid and ask, you know, depending on what your preference is, but last is ultimately the judge, jury, and executioner, where money trades hands. So this is, you know, a price showing the implied volatility of this option throughout the day, the last price. And then here's the IV, excuse me, that was the price of the option throughout the day. And then here's our implied volatility of the option. So you can see we had a spike, and now it's kind of come back down as we go into 12:30 here. And then there's the table. So this is also one of my favorite charts because it shows the bid and ask of the option, the last price, the implied volatility, and then how much volume traded hands. So I think this is also a really good informative table. You can see where money is changing hands. And then we have our time skew. So this is also available here within the charts tab. But just real quick, what this basically shows you is when you look out, you know, 0 days to maturity, right? So day of, 6 days, 10 days, 24, all the way out here. It shows you what implied volatility looks like for both puts and calls. Calls are in green, puts are in blue. You could see shorter term, we have a higher implied volatility, then it kind of crashes and then heads higher. You can also look for discrepancies between calls and puts. For QQQ, it's pretty tight, and it normally is. But when you're looking at individual names, you can find some interesting discrepancies here. So that's another chart available to you within this view. So now I'd like to move on to the charting view, right? Because that was what we call stock monitor view. Here's the charting view. When you pull up a charts tab with IVolLive, you'll get 4 default charts. It's going to give you the spot price of SPY over the past year. That's what Y1 stands for. It's going to give you the implied volatility for at the money options for the S&P, right? For period 1 year. It's going to give you the historical volatility for SPY for 1 year. And it's going to give you the total options open interest and volume for the S&P for 1 year. So this is going to be your default, right? S&P is probably the most followed index that our users have. And that's why these 4 charts pop up. But what you can see is a few different things. There's different ways to view these charts depending on your preference. I like the Big Mac view, which is what I call that one. And there's also all these different chart types. So there's spot price, implied volatility, single contract analyzer, which we just looked at, implied volatility index, total open interest of volume, historical volatility, term structure, skew chart, IV premium, and IV difference. Today, I want to focus on our spot price chart, our implied volatility chart, our historical volatility chart, and our total open interest in volume. And then next Tuesday, we'll wrap up with the IV index, term structure, skew chart, IV premium, and IV difference. Although we have a condensed version of the skew chart and term structure in that previous view we just showed. So I went ahead and created examples here. So I'm going to show these examples, and I'm going to show how to build these examples with a few mouse clicks. But basically what I did is I used that editorial piece to create these charts here. Let me come here. And so if you'll recall, let's pull up. So here we go. Here's spot price. And a key part of this, while you can't draw on these charts and you can't add technical analysis, what you can do is I like to look at this charts tab for comparisons, right? Because on our stock monitor view here, we can't add any comparisons. So we can't compare QQQ with SPY, for example. But under this charts tab, we can do all kinds of comparisons because on each one of these chart types, you can add up to 8 different stocks per chart, right? So 8 times 10 different chart types is 80 different data points you can look at. So let's go ahead and expand this view for spot price. Let's start, with a simple one. So this is where you would come if you wanted to look at how different stocks trade relative to one another. And the way you know what you're looking at is you just click on this color cue. So here's our legend. We have Apple in gold, Microsoft in blue, Google in orange, Amazon in olive, NVIDIA in kind of that maroon, Tesla in turquoise, and Meta in purple. And then if you put your cursor over any of these lines, it tells you what you're looking at. And what you can do is you can see how these stocks trade. You know, do they trade normally, or do they have a tight correlation? Do they trade opposite of one another? If we come out here to present day, we could see that NVIDIA is really kind of taken off from the group. You know, so NVIDIA has skyrocketed higher as artificial intelligence has become kind of front page, all-consuming news. NVIDIA skyrocketed, and you know, the Microsofts and Apple, Meta, Tesla, they haven't necessarily caught up. Apple recently retraced after its earnings. You know, Wall Street was disappointed by its earnings announcement. So this is a really cool chart to look at. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7. So we could add, you know, another one to this mix. You know, this is $1 trillion tech, so you know, Intel wouldn't really qualify. But for an example, you could add Intel, and Intel's been added to our chart. So that'd be the 8th data point for spot price. So I'll show how to build a spot price chart. If you want to minimize the color wheel here, the legend, you just hit X. If you wanted to get rid of a stock, you would hit the trash can, and that would delete it from the chart. So again, that's pretty easy. And anything you want to add, you would just click compare, type in the symbol, and then you would hit apply. So that's how spot price works. Implied volatility is also very interesting. So let's come here and expand this view. So remember, if you look up here from left to right, you know, you'll have your baseline. So Apple was the baseline that I ran the scan against. And then you have your comparison. So we're able to add any symbol here. What's going to happen is once you add a criteria or a symbol, you could choose, you know, what moneyness you want, right? Do you want to be at the money, or do you want to be out of the money, you know, put, or do you want to be out of the money call? You know, so what side of the strike price do you want to be on, depending on your trading style. And you can also change the period. If you're a very short-term trader, you can look at implied volatility over a 7-day period. If you're a very long-term trader, you're trading leaps, for an example, you could look at 360 or beyond. In this particular case, what I was comparing with this chart is I was comparing the implied volatility for at the money options, right, which is kind of the easiest to imagine in your head, for Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, NVIDIA, Tesla, and Meta. Again, I took that article that we put out and I just keyed in those names and I set it all to the same period. So that way it's apples to apples. But this is a good example. You know, we could have Apple here at the money. And if I just wanted to have an implied volatility chart on Apple, I could add under comparison, I could add another Apple and I could just change the moneyness, right? So that's just if you wanted to get really granular on an individual name. But what was great about this is that it shows us the relationship between implied volatility in these different names, right? These tech giants. So we could see, for an example, here on December 27, 2022, Tesla had this giant spike in implied volatility, right? Much higher than these names. And you can see the names that generally trade, you know, with lower implied volatility, right? Which on this chart is Apple. Apple typically trades with a low implied volatility relative to its peers, which is illustrative. If you see a sudden spike in Apple and it starts rising higher, you know, we say, whoa, over the past year, that hasn't been the case with Apple, you know, what's going on? And that's a signal to dig deeper. And then in present day, what we see is that NVIDIA has had this big increase in implied volatility. And so, you know, we saw that while NVIDIA has been climbing higher, we looked at that on the spot price chart, its implied volatility is also going higher, right? So this has been a volatile move, which means option prices are very juicy, right? So if you're selling options, now could be an interesting time on NVIDIA. Whereas if you're buying options, Apple could be a good target because its implied volatility is low, right? And then, you know, these other names are kind of in the middle, Meta, Amazon, and Tesla. They're kind of, you know, medium priced options at this point. So we know, okay, just with this one chart, we know NVIDIA out of this group will have the most expensive options. Apple will have the cheapest options. So if we're buying or selling, that could really impact our decision. So that's what I like to use the implied volatility chart for. It tells me what's cheap and what's dear. Historical volatility is also interesting. You know, we can look back and see times where things really got crazy. So here's Meta. Things got wild for Meta in November 2022. And what's cool about this is it shows what actually happened. You know, NVIDIA, of course, has had a wild journey this year as well. So, you know, a lot of traders like looking at historical volatility because, again, this is showing kind of what actually happened, right? As this has happened in the past. And if we look now from this list, Tesla has the highest historical volatility, right? So Tesla's been very volatile historically over the past year. NVIDIA's volatility is kind of spiking over the past 6 months. And so we could see Tesla, historically, and we could see the relationship again, and when, these get out of whack. So our lowest on historical volatility is, what is this one? Apple. So Apple's lowest on historical volatility and implied volatility. So again, if this starts inching higher and crossing over these other competitors, we know something's going on with Apple. Moving on to total open interest and volume. This is another very popular chart. What I screened for here is, these are all very liquid names, so I'm not really concerned with open interest. What I wanted to see was volume. So what we can look at is, this is call and put volume for these names, right? And so I ran that scan earlier within the stock monitor, but this is how you see it in chart form. So we could see by far the most active out of all these names is Tesla, because Tesla's in this turquoise color, and you can see going back the past year, it's almost always Tesla in the lead, followed by what looks like Apple in terms of volume. So again, while implied volatility and historical volatility has been low, that doesn't mean options traders aren't making bets, right? It just means they're not as expensive to make, and so Apple's been also a very actively traded name. And then after Apple, it kind of all scissors back and forth down here with these other 5 names. So this is also a very interesting chart, because when you're looking at different peer group, in this case tech, you could see where most of the action tends to be, right? So that's another one that I like. Again, you can minimize that. So those are the 4 within the charting view I wanted to show. The way you would create those, just real quick, because I do want to make sure everybody knows how the sausage is made. We could pull up a new charts tab. So when we pull up a new charts tab, you'll see, again, these 4 defaults. These are going to be for the S&P. And again, if we wanted to focus on the names we've been focused on today, there's a couple different ways you could do it. What I do, though, is I just hit X, and then I come here, add new chart, spot price. We put our base case, which is Apple, and then we do 1 year, add the chart. So now we have our one name that we're going to compare others against. This could be anything. If you were looking at oil, this could be Chevron. But in our case, we're looking at $1 trillion tech today, so to speak. And then to add a comparison is super easy. Just to compare, there's Microsoft, here's Google, here was Amazon, and then here's Meta. And then here is Tesla. So I'm just going to kind of do this quickly so you guys see how it's done. So that's spot price. And then you come here for implied volatility. Again, we put in our base case. I tend to use whatever I use as my base case in spot. I tend to use as my base case for all subsequent charts, just to keep everything straight. So we choose our time frame. We can look at 1 year, but again, you have as granular as 1 day and as far out as 5 year. So feel free to use whatever's the best fit for you and your trading. And then for our implied volatility, again, we have as near term as options that expire in 7 days, and as far out as options that expire in 1,080 days, right? So the most popular of those typically IVX 30, and then at the money, right? Or again, depending on if you're an out of the money type trader, choose whichever suits your trading style best. But for now, this is how I created the chart that I was just showing. And then at this point, again, it's very easy to add comparisons, right? So there's Microsoft. I won't do all of them, but there's Google. Here's Amazon. All right. So that's how you would add this implied volatility chart. And then historical volatility, very, very similar. We have our base case. When you're comparing apples to apples, like I like to compare implied volatility to historical volatility, and I like that to be apples to apples. And so I'll go to a 1 year time range, but then I'll go to HV20. So the nuance here is that historical volatility is measured in calendar days. Implied volatility is measured in, historical volatility is measured in market open days, right? So 20 is 4 weeks worth of the market being open, is 20 trading days. That's 1 month. And implied volatility, it's calendar days. So IV30 is really a month as well. So HV20 and IV30 are apples to apples. So just to make that point for anybody that's brand new. And then again, once I have my base as Apple, it's easy for me to add these other names to compare and hit apply. And you'd continue doing that until all of them are there. And then finally, the last chart that we had was total open interest and volume. So I mentioned I like to look at volume, not so much open interest. When I'm looking at big, heavily traded names, I like to look at calls and puts. So here, instead of open interest, what I would do is I'd hit volume, add chart. And so now here is our 1 year chart for Apple on only volume, right? And it's calls and puts. And then here I would add, again, as needed, Microsoft, Google, and then Amazon. And then, of course, if you do want to look at open interest as well, you could certainly do that. You could just add that, or what you could do is you could come here and you could add total open interest and volume, but instead of volume, we could come here and we could say, all right, we want to look at 1 year call and put, and we only want to look at open interest for Apple, right? And now we have that chart here. And then we can change the view just in case it gets, a little wonky. We could come here on spot, so we see our spot price relationship, and then we see our implied vol, historical volatility. We have our volume, and then we have our open interest. And so there's all kinds of cool ways you can, change the views here, depending on your preference. So again, next week, what I want to cover is the term structure skew chart, IV premium, which is awesome when you're doing comparisons, especially if you're comparing, say, Apple to Microsoft, and then IV difference, which is also very useful when you're comparing two different names against one another. So I'll focus on those next week. For now, I want to pause right about 45 minutes after the hour, and I want to look to see if we have any questions. Let's see. Just making sure, was everybody able to hear me okay? Just making sure the audio is loud and clear. Okay, great. Just making sure, with Zoom, sometimes you never know. Let me see. Signal 5. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you for confirming, everybody. How to make a chart with implied volatility and historical volatility on the same chart. Okay, so within the best way to do implied volatility versus historical volatility would be, I like this view best. So if we take Apple for an example, what you'll have, and the reason why I like this view best is you get it by default. So here we have implied volatility in green, and we have historical volatility in orange, right? And again, this is a default view, so you don't have to change anything to be able to look at that. And this was my point earlier. IVX30 is the same, is apples to apples as HV20. It's comparing same time frame. So my favorite way to look at historical volatility versus implied volatility is within this charting view. This is by far my favorite. And then what we showed earlier is if you just want to look at implied volatility, you can actually delete historical volatility and you can delete price. And now you have just implied volatility. So that's something you can do. Or you could refresh and you can have all those measures back. And again, this is the view that you're able to take a photo, or you're able to add technical indicators to, from within this view here. So that's my favorite way to do it. You can see here's your different measures like implied volatility, historical volatility as well. There we go. And that'd be the same for Microsoft. And this is also where we can draw, which I showed how to do earlier in the webinar. And I know we had a bunch of people join us throughout the session. We will edit this and then we'll shoot it out to everyone that registered so you can go back and watch it at your leisure. But great question. All right. Looks like we had a nice, efficient session. Again, the main overall point was we started, if you did just join us, we started here in our dashboard. We found some interesting ideas to dig deeper on. In our case, what we were most interested in was this $1 trillion tech piece, kind of that our IVolLive team, put out. So we took these, 7 or 8 names. It was really 7 because Saudi Aramco was our outlier. And we looked at these that had achieved a $1 trillion valuation. Some of them have retraced, some of them have continued higher. And we looked at their charts within IVolLive. And so now step 2 would be, taking what we found in the charts and then finding names we're interested in. For an example, if we thought, Apple is going to rebound after their bad earnings, and we had run them through the sentiment analyzer, then we'd run the trade through the P&L calculator, and then we would execute the trade with our broker, if we liked it. So in our final charting webinar, I'll show how to kind of put all these pieces together, from initial idea, running it through the chart, to then finding a trade, and then executing the trade. So that'll be, part 3. Well, great. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this. Please let us know what you thought. Here is our line here, IVolLive.com. So we're always available at support@IVolLive.com, for any of your questions. And if you're not currently a user, shoot us a note at support@IVolLive.com. That way we can set you up with our 7-day free trial and get you in the platform, and rocking and rolling. So please shoot us a note whether you have a question or whether you're really ready to get going with the platform. We do have a couple different account types that we could go over for those that want to move forward. It just depends on your trading style and kind of what access you need. But just shoot us a note there and we'll get you squared away. All right, great. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. Excuse me. This has been Jonathan with iVolatility. Enjoyed it. And until next time, happy trading.
Thank you.
Thank you.